Hello guys, welcome back to Raising Reef. I'm Rob Shaw, and in today's video we're going to do an update on my current system. So in today's video we've got some good news, we've got some bad news, we've got some more bad news and maybe some good news. So let's start off with the good news. Some of you may, if you've been following along with my videos, remember that I had an alkalinity swing in my tank and it killed a couple of colonies of SPS coral that I had. Fortunately, the frag of the whole colony that melted that I had on the frag rack remained fine, and I've repositioned that where the old coral used to be, and I must say it's starting to grow really well, and it's going to not be long before it's a colony in its own right. So I'm really pleased about that. Some bad news that came from that alkalinity swing was that I lost one of my lobos, one that was on the bottom. It was one that I did the invasive coral video from and I cleaned the exenia off of. It never really got going again after that. There was a few times when it would be puffy and look like it was growing. Other times it looked a little bit withdrawn and not really loving life. The alkalinity swing was obviously the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to that coral, and it completely melted over a few days. I noticed a patch of one of the polyps was dead and just completely melted, and then over the course of the next couple of days that whole big sort of area died. There was another separate piece, but that soon followed the same. With that rock completely dead, I removed it from the tank and I gave it a good scrub to make sure that everything that was growing on it that I didn't want it was removed. And this offered me an opportunity. Now, I have a torch coral which used to sit pride and place right in the middle of my tank here, and it was a small piece that I'd saved from a client's tank which was on the verge of death. It was the tiniest little half a polyp that was left, and it was on a long piece of skeleton, and I wedged it in the rock. I secured it in with a bit of milliput, and I half expected it to just die and that be the end of that. But you try these things to see if they'll come back. Fortunately, this coral did come back with a vengeance. It's now split into two heads. We're probably about 6 months or so down the line from then, maybe a little bit longer, and it has grown massively. It was stinging everything around it within a 6-inch area, and it was really starting to cause some problems. I had tried previously to move a few other corals just to create a bit more space for it, but this just seemed to encourage it to inflate even more and become larger, and I've had to remove it. Well, now that the lobo was gone in the bottom corner down here, I was able to mount that coral to that piece of rock that used to be the lobo and now is just a piece of rock, and that's given it the support it needs to stand upright, and it is loving life down in the corner of this tank. I do love a torch coral. They're one of my favourite corals in the hobby. Not particularly rare. They can be a little bit funny when it comes to water parameters. Out of all of the euphyllias, they're probably the most temperamental and can just sort of fade away for no apparent reason or start to play up or sulk. This one seems to be doing really well at the moment and really enjoying its space. Since I've moved it down here, it seems to have got even bigger than it was before. Whether that's just because it's got more space to spread out. It is stinging a coral that hangs it a little bit here, but this is a large piece of coral which I have a lot more of elsewhere in the tank, and unfortunately I don't really have anywhere else to move that to, so I'm going to have to just suffer the fact that it's getting stung, safe in the knowledge that I've got other pieces of it scattered around the tank, so I'm not going to lose the green barley slimer anytime soon. So we can afford to let it get a little bit stung down at the bottom. People who may have watched some of my previous videos would have seen a firefish milling around in this area of the tank. He's no longer with us, and he died through a mistake of my very own making. I was completely gutted, but It was a malfunction with my auto feeder, and it was that I didn't set it properly. I replaced the batteries in it, reset the time, I reset the times I wanted it to feed. There is a third function on there in which you can set how many times it feeds each time it goes off. So you can have it rotate once, twice. When you reset the system, it defaults to no times, and I forgot to add those times in, so for about a month the whole tank was going unfed by the auto feeder. It was getting the odd little supplemental feeding where I would press the button to make sure it was still working, or I would add some food to the tank, but this was becoming rare during this time because I was particularly busy. And unfortunately this resulted in aggression in the tank from my clowns because of the lack of food. They stopped laying eggs because of the lack of nutrition. They started picking on the other fish, and this was a little bit too much for the firefish to take. By the time I realised the mistake that I'd made, it was a little bit too late for the firefish, and it was the very next day that it was dead. So sad news, I lost my other firefish, one of my favourite fish in the reefing hobby, and I will be getting another pair for the new system once that's up and running. So lessons learned here: make sure that you set your equipment up properly, or you're going to cause issues that you would otherwise be avoided. Other news in the tank: I run an LED unit, the Aqua Illuminations Hydra 26 HD LED, and I have about a month ago reduced the light intensity that LED unit is putting out. I noticed from a video I previously made, watching that back, that some of my corals looked a little bit bleached out, and I thought maybe that I was giving it too much light, so I've dialed back some of the colours to a little bit less than they were. I think I've probably dropped them by about 20%, maybe a little bit more, and everything seems to be responding well. My strawberry shortcake frag, which looked quite washed out in the video, is now starting to colour up really nicely and showing good colour. It's still maintaining good growth, so I'm pleased that I reduced the light. I will be doing a par test on this tank shortly, but I need to get my par meter back. I've lent it to somebody. When I first set up the tank, I checked the par meter. I checked with the par meter the level of my light unit based on the program that I set it to, compared to what my previous light on this tank was at, and there was a difference of about 100 par between the two, so I used the acclimation mode on the Hydra 26 over a month to slowly ramp up to its full intensity. This works really well, and no corals had a negative response. It's just after time has passed, I've noticed that some of the corals had a bleached appearance. And since reducing that light intensity down, I've noticed that a lot of those colours are starting to come through. So I was definitely overlighting the aquarium, and things are looking a lot better since I've reduced it. Some other news with this particular setup is my remote refugium. I run chaetomorpha algae on a 20-hour light cycle, and up until now it's been doing really well. There has been a few occasions over the last couple of years where it's got infested with other types of algae that seem to outcompete it. This is like a turf or a hair style algae. It's quite wiry, so it's more like a turf algae, and it actually grows on the structure of the chaetomorpha. This makes it hard to clean off, and I've tried to rinse it off as best I can and restart the ball of chaeto from some clean bits that I had, but unfortunately what I had left has now become contaminated with this algae also, so I'm going to have to ditch it and replace it with some fresh. Luckily I have a local friend who has a big refugium full of the stuff, and he's going to provide me with some chaetomorpha algae, and he also has some caulerpa algae that I'm going to be putting into the refugium also, just for a bit of diversity. Chaetomorpha is nice and safe, and you can light that on a reverse light cycle, and you can have a dark period and it works just fine. It's nice and safe to use without causing any problems in the aquarium. Caulerpa, on the other hand, can be a little bit troublesome. It can turn sexual, and this usually happens if you don't light it for 24 hours a day, or you don't prune it often enough. If you leave it to grow quite large within your refugium and you don't prune it back, it can turn sexual, which means a lot of it dies off, it spores out into the water, and this can cause absolute havoc within your aquarium. So it's a good idea to either light it 24 hours a day or continuously pull quite a lot of it out on a weekly basis. But I'm going to be doing that. I quite like it. It grows in a very different structure to the Chaetomorpha, and it lends itself better to more of a display type algae within the aquarium. So we're going to be running some of that. I just need to go and pick it up from my mate. So that's about it for this tank update. I don't think there's any other news that I can tell you that's going on with this tank that we don't already know about. Obviously the focus for me has been on the new setup, and this tank has just been sort of ticking along in the background doing its thing. I still enjoy it very much, but obviously all of the stuff in here is going to be moved over to the new tank, or at least most of it. I'm going to have to be a little bit more restrained about what I add to the new tank, because there are some other corals that I want to introduce, and as you can see from this shot, this tank is pretty stuffed with coral as it is. The new tank is exactly the same dimensions as that, and if you want to follow along with that build, you can watch that right from day one in my list of videos on my channel. If you want to subscribe to my channel, you'll see the future updates that are coming for that. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Take it easy guys, and I'll see you in the next video.